Okay, this is going to be a short lecture about the Alexie project. And I've said this before, but you guys did a great job on this. I found your responses to be thoughtful, reflective, basically well written. And I really haven't done this assignment sequence in an online class, even though I've been teaching Alexie for many years in my traditional courses. One thing I'd like you to think about, this is optional, is if you want to shoot me an email with your thoughts about what made this assignment successful or not so successful, any kind of feedback is welcome. I'm just as interested in what can be improved or changed as I am about what works. So that's pretty important to me. You could include your thoughts on the Why I Love America discussion board assignment as well, since both deal heavily with this idea of identity. And I'll talk more about identity later. Now to the important stuff. I thought I'd go ahead and start this lecture off with a little bit of a musical video interlude. I'm sure you're surprised by that. This is a song by a band called Redbone, and it's called Come and Get Your Love. I'm sure you've heard this before, especially if you like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and it's been in some commercials lately too. So this is by Redbone. This is all Native Americans, one of the only all Native American bands that ever had hits. So in the beginning of the video, one of the musicians comes on stage wearing what's referred to as regalia, performing what's called a fancy dance. So in powwows, and they have these all across the nation, the central feature is fancy dance competitions. It's highly physical and it's symbolic. If you really watch them, these guys are exhausted, and women do them too when they're done. The performers wear beautiful costumes, the regalia, when they compete. If you want to see more about this, just Google fancy dancing sometime. You might find it interesting. Okay, so we had a bit of a pause there. So I want to start the lecture just talking about some of the thoughts about the Alexie project. The place I want to start is how your K through 12 education failed you, or I know what you know about Native Americans. I think I could probably boil down something that you have a very broad, general sense of. Well, probably the one most specifically is, we all know the Thanksgiving mythology and all the stuff about Native Americans all included with that. You've probably heard of Trail of Tears. Many of you mentioned that. Many of you mentioned Thanksgiving in your essays. You probably know something about Sacagawea during the Lewis and Clark expedition. And probably all you really know about Pocahontas is the kind of the Disney version that we're all familiar with. Believe me, it doesn't have a happy ending, and you can Wikipedia that, find that out. So the things that they probably never talked about as you're going through your K through 12 experience is you probably never heard the words state-sponsored genocide or ethnic cleansing, which is exactly what it was. And I think Alexie is very clear about that. One of the things a lot of you talked about was reservations were created as a place for the remaining Native Americans to essentially become extinct. And a lot of you actually talked about that, which was really good, because that was like one of the things you didn't know before. The US government here, well, I'll go back. Alexie talks a lot about alcoholism among the Native Americans. And the US government realized that Native Americans are, kind of predisposed to kind of alcoholism. And I think, lately, one of the things I do know is that kind of they're genetically predisposed to alcoholism, so it's never really a part of what their lives. And there's some kind of genetic thing, okay? So, of course, the US government decided that if we give them lots of alcohol, they're drunk and they're more easily, manipulated, and we'll do what we want. And that the US Army regularly carried out armed attacks on villages populated only by women, children, and the elderly, while the men were out hunting or, trying to defend themselves. So, this part down here you know, I don't think you probably heard much about that. So this is kind of how I relate to the work of Alexie. I'm from Spokane, Washington, and Spokane has 3 major Indian reservations within 30 to 60 miles of it. There's the Spokane Reservation, the Colville Reservation, and the Coeur d'Alene Reservation in Idaho. And these reservations still battle alcoholism, drug addiction, poverty, violence, and high rates of teen suicide. But the money from the, you know, you've all heard of the Indian casinos. And these reservations do have Indian casinos, and that money has been put back into the communities. And there's been notable improvements in the quality of life, but still not great. Many of these people do live in the city and integrate into the culture. I think, as Alexie pointed out, you know, 70% of Native Americans do not live on reservations, but often at the expense of losing touch with their culture and traditions. Myself, I've gone to school, studied with, done business with hundreds of Native Americans in my lifetime. So I want to tell you a little story about a woman I knew named Debbie Louie. When I was going to graduate school at Eastern Washington University, Debbie Louie was one of my colleagues there. She was a student also. Debbie Louie had come down from the Colville Reservation to work on her master's degree. And she brought her son with her to this place called Cheney, Washington, where Eastern Washington University is. And Debbie was a delight, one of my good friends. And we did a lot of work together. And towards the end of the first semester, Debbie Louie left and went back to the reservation, or was leaving, and she told me she was going to do this. And the reason why is her son had never lived off the reservation, and he was in middle school. He was essentially just coming apart, being away from that sort of tribal existence that Alexie talks about a lot. And so Debbie Louie actually had to drop out of college and move back to the reservation to save her son. So that's kind of just a personal experience I've had, and it's kind of so identity. So Alexie's work is very focused on identity, the complexity of the identity, the fluidity of identity, the loss of identity, the desire to embrace one's identity, and sometimes the desire to extinguish one's identity, and at times the ambiguity of the identity. So, you know, identity is not an easy thing to really wrap your mind around. So, but the thing I want to make clear is that in virtually every short story we've read, to some degree, identity is a key feature. I'm not going to really discuss each story, but here's some examples. In Story of an Hour, we see Mrs. Millard's perception of her identity evolve in a very short time. First, we see her shift to perceiving herself as a wife whose identity is consumed by her husband's identity. Next, we see how the protagonist's name changes from the oppressive Mrs. Millard to the singular, independent Louise. In Rose for Emily, the story's focused on Emily's identity that appears to be imposed on her by outside forces, the past, the townspeople, her family. We all know what end that led to. Lucis Natre, again, a character who basically lives her life based on an identity that was imposed upon her. Even her death somehow fulfills the expectations of the locals, but at least this time it's her choice. Sonny's Blues, the narrator's actions are driven by how he perceives his identity, especially in relation to what he sees, to what he believes his responsibilities are regarding Sonny. And at the same time, we see Sonny who stays true to his identity. A good man's hard to find in Good Country People. I think you guys did a really good job with identity on those as we were going through those projects. Both stories deal with how one's self-perception can come into conflict with the reality of his or her own perception of identity and kind of the problems that come along with that. So you're probably asking, Kiwi, how do you feel about your own identity? So I'll tell you, if I had to describe my identity in less than 5 words, it would be blue collar intellectual. Now, when I say intellectual, I'm not trying to be snooty or smarter than others. So that's not the case. I say blue collar because I come from generations of laborers or farmers On the other hand, I'm a well-educated person. Getting a master's degree ain't easy. One way I describe my take on my identity is to say I can discuss cattle farming, transmissions, and Shakespeare, all based equally on experience and knowledge. As a matter of fact, I can still castrate a bull calf with my eyes closed. So in my case, the family I was raised in was constantly in economic crisis, even to the point of losing everything in a bankruptcy. Although my parents were loving and emotionally supportive, they just didn't do money well. My father always worked in very lucrative jobs. So my identity for a large part of my life was defined by work. If you worked, the men in my family respected you. You were part of the club, and then part of your identity. They never really cared whether you liked your job, just that you were a good worker. None of these people ever discussed going to college. Never a part of the conversation. For them, two things mattered: graduate from high school and then get to work. I've lived up to their expectations. That's kind of the end of chapter 1. Excuse me. Now for the second chapter. So I'm going to tell you about that. So up until I was 30, I'd worked different kinds of jobs and spent a lot of time in the kind of the automotive field. And the last, from the time I was about 26, 25 to 30, I managed automotive centers, kind of like these Goodyear and Firestone and Savannah, was big automotive centers. And it was good money, but I didn't really like it. And my wife, we'd been married for a little bit. She knew that I wasn't very happy, but I didn't really know what to do with it. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, my brother and I are first generation college, and I'm talking about amongst all of my cousins and everybody. We're the first ones that went to college. My brother actually went before I did. So she suggested, she was just finishing up her master's degree, by the way. So she suggested I go to college, and I said, nah, too old, too dumb. Not going to sit in a room and make a bunch of young punks make me look stupid. And she kind of kept bugging me about it. She said, well, why don't you just go take a night class at the community college and see how it goes. So I thought, oh, okay, I can do that. So I did. Signed up for a history class. Showed up. There's a lot of people that looked like me. Actually got a B in the class. Actually enjoyed it. Quit my job. Went up to Spokane Falls Community College. And signed up as a full-time student. And I went there, had a great experience. Matter of fact, that's why I teach at two-year colleges, because I really liked two-year colleges. And the experience I had there was really transformational. Made me believe I could do this. Then I transferred to Eastern Washington University. Didn't know quite sure what I wanted to do. English was kind of my area. I've always liked to write and read, all that stuff. And so I started out there kind of in their ed program to teach high school, but quickly realized that that probably wasn't a good plan. So I just went ahead and got a degree in English. And a lot of people would say, well, what are you going to do with that? Well, I do know one thing for sure. Excuse me. There's a lot more opportunities with a degree than without a degree. As a matter of fact, one of the things I would tell you guys is, for a lot of you, you may never work in the field that you get your degrees in, but it doesn't really matter, because if you look at job postings, you'll notice most of them just say they want a bachelor's degree. They don't say which one, because they don't care. So, all kinds of doors open. So I was kind of lucky, because by the time I finished my undergraduate at Eastern Washington University, one of my, kind of a mentor of mine asked me what I was going to do after I got my bachelor's degree. And I said, I'm going to go look for a job. And he said, well, we think you should go to graduate school. And trust me, I'd never thought about going to graduate school. I said, well, man, it's too expensive. He said, no. We want you to be a teaching assistant, and we'll pay you to teach one class a semester, and we'll pay your tuition. You just have to pay for your books. So I went home and told my wife about this, and she said, why are you even asking me? You're an idiot. Go do it. So I did. Well, now here I am. And I really, obviously, I think, love what I do. So my identity, well, just to go back, I worked on a cattle ranch and wheat farm all through high school. I worked as a mechanic in a service station. I worked at a video store for a while. So I did a lot of things. So to think that I would be a professor at college is kind of still sometimes a shock to me. Sometimes I think that, I think part of my identity is this kind of imposter thing where they're going to catch me and make me not do this anymore. So I hope that explains kind of how I see myself. Now, just real quickly, as far as identity goes, when you start having kids, well, a big part of your identity then becomes being a father. When you're married, you're a husband. So again, identity is not an easy thing, but it is part of who we are. Okay, so in what it means, say Phoenix, Arizona, there's two characters that are very symbolic and represent two opposing forces. The traditional and the more modern. Thomas is the medicine man, the storyteller, the shaman. He's magical. Victor, who seems lost, angry, dispossessed, is kind of both a warrior and an Indian living in the modern age. In an interview, Alexie claims his stories are his God. I think what he's saying is stories are where the truth lies, much like Flannery O'Connor. Stories are where we can be both comfortable and uncomfortable. Of course, this leads me to a question. Does a story have to be true? In the interview, Alexie shares a poem about Mount Rushmore. Weirdly enough, I've been to Mount Rushmore 3 times. The last time was just recently when I moved my daughter to Billings, Montana. Rushmore is in Rapid City, South Dakota, on the way to Billings. She insisted we check it out. Let me tell you, it truly is, in Alexie's words, silly. So now I'm going to tell you a true story about Indian basketball on the Spokane Reservation in the town of Willpennant. And then this mini lecture will be over. So once upon a time, growing up in a town called Sprague, Washington, which is a small farm town outside of Spokane, our basketball team was in a league or division where one of the teams would play was the Willpennant basketball team. And Willpennant is the kind of the town on the Spokane Indian Reservation. So once a year, or maybe it was once every other year, I can't remember, but we would get on a bus and drive up to Willpennant to play basketball. And I'll tell you, Indian basketball is not like any other kind of basketball. It's dirty, it's fast, it's a pretty crazy experience. The people in the stands, the Willpennant fans, one of the first things they do is they give everybody on the opposing team a nickname. And, not usually too bad, but, mine usually had something to do with being a little large. They just kind of ride you the whole game. And these players were kind of small, but they were very, very, very fast, and they could handle the ball well. And they'd foul you, they didn't care. They just, and the refs didn't care. All the refs wanted to do was get through the game without inciting a riot and getting the hell off the reservation. So it was always like nobody wanted to go to Willpennant to play basketball. It was always, and we usually got our ass kicked there. So strange experience, totally different. But the one thing that kind of was interesting about all of this is that after the game, over in the cafeteria at the school, they'd have dinner for, you know, the fans and the players. And we always went over and had, yeah, it's pretty traditional, hamburgers, hot dogs, that kind of stuff. But they did have a thing called fry bread, which is really good. It's kind of like, I guess, elephant ears or whatever they're called at the fair. So, but when they would come down to Sprague to play basketball, they were all on their best behavior. The guys didn't play quite as dirty or felt quite as much. And, you know, we usually won on our court, but it was quite an experience. And Indian basketball is a real thing. I think if you Googled Indian basketball, you'd be surprised. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about